What's going on, everyone? If you are getting ready for your Dynasty Rookie Drafts, there are some things you can do and some not to do to help you get ready and make sure you crush it. So, Chris and me are going to go over each of our top 5 Dynasty Rookie Draft tips and tricks to help you crush your league. So, stay tuned because here we go.
Welcome to the Heroes of Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Heroes of Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Matt High. That is Chris Felice. We have a really fun episode today. Rookie draft is coming up for a lot of people. The NFL draft is coming up. We're doing our rookie breakdown shows very, very shortly. People are looking. You want tips and tricks how to dominate your dynasty rookie drafts, and we've done a lot of them. We've seen some strategies work, some strategies not work. We've learned a thing or two about a thing or two. So we're going to give each one of us came up with 5 draft tips to help you dominate these drafts and not lose your dynasty league. So let's just get right into it. Chris, what do you say?
Let's do it.
All right. Why don't you start with your first tip for dynasty managers to nail their dynasty rookie drafts?
So my first tip is to not pick a player you have no use for, especially if they're not touted as a generational talent. Many at times, and I am also perhaps semi-guilty of this. Will you be perhaps in the second round of your draft, early second round, you're going to pick a guy, perhaps this like wide receiver who, you've heard rumblings about. You've heard that maybe they could end up being really, really good. But one of the most overlooked positions in fantasy is tight end. I would argue. I feel like a lot of teams don't really have any depth there. They usually go with one, and I think that's a fine strategy to go with. I feel like there's a lot of like maneuverability in terms of getting a tight end, perhaps even a stable running back. Wide receiver is always the flashiest position. This is, I feel like, the easiest fallacy to fall for with wide receiver, or perhaps even the late quarterback dropping to you, right? Even if maybe you don't think he's gonna be, something crazy, he could still be okay. I mean, take how long did it take Jordan Love to finally see the field? It took him forever, you know. I feel I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Jalen Hurts in our league, I believe, went in the third round.
Jalen
During
Hurts, Brock Purdy, Mac
I
Jones, a
mean,
bunch of people. Yeah,
it's
every year.
easy to take the skill position player, uh, but it's even when you don't need them. But in your head, you're like, oh, but the depth. The depth doesn't mean anything if you're never going to use them. At some point, you do have too much depth. I would argue. I would argue if you don't have depth at every position. So I'm not saying don't take the generational talent. You obviously should. But if you're like in the mid, you're like end of the first and the second round, and you're trying to debate of like, oh, but I heard rumblings, but there's a safer option, something that makes more sense for your team that will help you actually kind of round it out. Go with that option. I'm telling you, it'll make you a better fantasy football player. Don't be me. Don't go into a draft between a couple of like teams or whatever, starting out dynasty and not pay attention to who's in the free agency. Realize there's no quarterbacks there, and only draft one quarterback through there, and have to trade your way out of it.
Hey,
And
you
get a
won the
little lucky.
league. You did
I
that.
got a
And
little
you
lucky
still
along the way,
got
and
the win.
I got a
So
little lucky along the way, and that's a prelude to my a point I'm going to have later on, because it's the only reason why I won. But yeah, so that's what I'm going to say.
all right, my first draft tip, and this is the most important one for me. I know we disagree on this, so we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna have a little discussion.
I'm just realizing that you said that, and I think it's gonna be really funny when I call you out on it later on, because I love seeing your number 5.
Yes, it's fun, but let's do this. You're gonna draft for talent. You're gonna trade for need. Okay? Just because you need a quarterback, just because you need a running back or wide receiver or tight end, does not mean you should prioritize them in your rookie drafts solely based on that. If you did that, right, let's say a couple years ago, there's this guy, Jamar Chase, pretty good at football. You needed a running back, and you decided, hey, I need to go draft Najee Harris. You know, Jamar Chase was the better talent. better prospect, but you drafted Najee Harris. So you passed on the number 1, 2, or 3, depending on who you talk to, wide receiver in the NFL and for fantasy football to draft Najee Harris, who has had one good season so far in fantasy football. If you do that, you can always trade for someone every time. You cannot trade for Jamar Chase right now. And if you can, please show us the trade. Comment
No,
below.
literally, please.
Show us the trade that got it done. Because in our league, our cohort Rich has Jamar Chase. We'd probably have to kill him. And even then, he's probably has like some crazy specific instructions that he cannot leave his roster no matter what. We cannot force him.
Kin.
Yeah. He takes
knows
over
what
and
to
that's
do.
it. That is the type of talent that you cannot trade for typically. The best way to get them is through the draft. He is a talent. Justin Jefferson's a similar one. Every year, there's always a player that gets propped up. Look at what happened with CEH and Jonathan Taylor. He went to a great situation, was not the better talent, but he was drafted ahead because people are like, okay, landing spot. All right, that's perfect. Chiefs, I just won my draft. Yeah, look at how that turned out. I know Jonathan Taylor might not be the epitome of a great example here because he has dealt with injury, but he won you championships this past year if you had him.
How about Amon-Ra St. Brown? I think Amon-Ra St. Brown
he was a value. I drafted him in like
he did. I think in like the
third round. It was a 301 in our draft. Those are guys I'm going to go for every time. You get into the later rounds, you look for upside. You look for players that you like. So that's why you can always trade for someone. Might cost you a little bit, but if you're at the point where you're one piece away, why not trade for them instead of trying to, go crazy and push people up that might not deserve it. So this is my number one tip, and it's what I've been doing for a while now, and it's paid off for me pretty good. So I know you disagree, so let's have it out here.
I kind of, when you originally said this to me, I kind of disagree with it a bit, and then I kind of slept on it. I can see what you're saying. I don't disagree nearly as much now that I've had a chance to kind of reflect
Good,
on what I've
you'd
said.
be wrong.
I disagree, but I still think you can do both, in my opinion. I mean, we'll take your example. You can always say anything in hindsight, and I'm sure there's plenty of ways that looks, you can take the other way around as well. I'm sure there's many ways where you've had to take the less polarizing prospect and it worked out for you. I'm sure there's plenty of situations. And there wasn't that much of a difference when we were looking it up between Najee Harris and Jamar Chase. Obviously, now the gap is at
Very
least
wide.
two planets wide. But yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I just think that you don't necessarily have to. You can do both. You can draft for needs if you need to. Like if it's there, you can do it. I think there's plenty of opportunity where you can feel confident. Like for instance, I guess if you're in like the second round, it gets. It's a very common trend that after the first round things get a little sketchy in terms
Well,
of
yeah,
stock.
this mainly I wanted.
Yeah.
This is more for the beginning of your draft where
Right.
people get pushed up for whatever reason, landing spot, or they have a good combine or really good pro day, and this one coach is like, oh, I could use them as this. They get comped to some NFL All Star where you're like, oh my god, I can see it. Let's do it. Awesome. Let's get him on my team. And it just turns out to be like whoopsie doozles. So
Whoops.
yeah, but yeah, in the second round, I mean, you get to the end of the first round, really, you're just like, give me
It's done.
someone that has some sort of talent that I can hope a coach sees. But probably won't happen. His hit rates are really bad once you get out of the first round. So, what about your second tip here?
Always be open. Be ready to hear all trade offers, no matter what. Every single pick has a price. Every year, usually what the person is the 101, they're always dead set on taking the Ashton Jeanty, the Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm trying to remember who it was to you.
Bijan, baby.
Thank you. It was Bijan.
I was not selling him.
Every single year, and there are times where I don't blame you, but I think you should at least hear the offers. not even just for one of them, but for every single pick. Trading picks during the draft, I have found, is the easiest way to generate overvalue for those picks. Um, and it's not even like you don't even have to do much conniving half the time. You can they just give it to you, right? I had a buddy of mine, different dynasty league, who we're in a 12-man dynasty league, had the like second, third overall pick, really didn't do a lot. Traded that pick for I remember Kyron Williams was in it, had traded back like 3 picks, and there was somebody, a wide receiver, I can't remember who it was, but it was like, a comparable, like, flex guy you could put in. Um, and instantaneously, he went from being to a couple more things working out with a couple of draft picks that he had to going to the finals. He lost, but he was in the finals in 1 year. And large part was due to that trade that he made. Uh, Always be willing to trade, like always be willing to hear the offers at least. You may not want to do the trade, and that's totally fine with you. But if you're given like an insane amount of value, you might as well take it. It's gonna probably be better than the one guy you're gonna get.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on what position you're in your dynasty league. Like, if trading away a pick or a player gets you to the next goal, like you got to weigh both pros and cons. So,
Sure.
I mean, I did that. I had a team that went to the finals 3 years in a row. I won one of those. I lost two, which really sucked. But after the third finals, after the second one I lost, I was like, you know what? Let's blow this thing up. I sold everybody. I had Jonathan Taylor, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, David Montgomery. I had basically just a stud team. And I was like, I see writing on the wall. It ain't going to get better this season. I see holes. Boom. Blew up my team. And last year, I was one crazy Jonathan Taylor game away from winning the championship. So it takes a little bit sometimes, but that's the best part about Dynasty. And if you're not in a Dynasty league, go find one because they're awesome. You get to be your own general manager. You get to see what these crazy NFL teams are doing. You get to join in on the fun. These are the best leagues out there because so many things go into making decisions. It's not just, oh, I like this person because he's the top 12 running back. It's like, all right, he's a top 12 running back this year, but next year he's going to be like outside the top 36. I should sell him in the offseason. Or it's just more fun. It's fantasy football all year round. And how can you say no to that? I know significant others probably don't like it as much. You know, when talking with my wife, she's like, "What do you mean you have another draft?" I'm like, well, it's the
What do you
rookie
mean you
draft.
have another draft?
It's the rookie draft. I thought the season doesn't
That's
start till
so
September.
funny.
Well, it does,
That's
but
so funny.
my season never ends. It's just Dynasty all year round, baby. So I'm gonna go on to my second tip here. Don't be afraid to trade back in the draft. Kind of goes hand in hand with your tip here. When you're in the draft, look at what's happening. Because there could be a player that you really like. Maybe someone jumps ahead of you and picks your player or something, or just picks a player that you did not expect to be there at that point. And you know the person, you're like, I could probably send you this and get that pick to get that player. So I'm going to give you kind of another part of this, a little bonus tip here. When you're looking at picks, put a player to it. Look at what that player could be. Not just the pick, because the 103 means nothing. 103 really could be the number one wide receiver in the draft, could be the number one quarterback, could be the number one running back. Some sort of player. Put that in it, and when you're looking at would I rather have this or that involving the pick, put a player to it. Would you rather have Devontae Adams, or would you rather have the what everyone has as their consensus wide receiver one in this class, Tet McMillan? I don't know. You got to pay attention to that. Don't just say, okay, the 103. Okay, what is the 103? I don't know yet because I'm not in the draft, and you won't know until you get into the draft. So don't be afraid to move around in your draft, whether it's up, down, left, right, center. Who knows? Let's go. What's tip number 3 here, Chris?
Don't forget about future years. This 1 year will not define your team. Plan ahead. Now, I know that I just told a story that 1 year did, in fact, define an entire team. But my point is when I say define a team, I mean like for years to come. Dynasty is about building up for the future. The whole point is to create a dynasty, to have the ability to have players come back year after year and bring you to greatness as many times as humanly possible. And you have to realize that if you're in a draft, okay, you got the 102. There's probably a reason you have the 102. If it's your pick, you're not going to leave the draft maybe thinking that you're going to win the whole thing unless something really awesome happens. A lot of trades could have occurred in your draft, but always think about doesn't have to be this year, right? I think it'd be better if you perhaps forgo winning 2 years to win 3 years in a row than it is to win 1 year and then wait like another six in order to win a year again. Constantly going on this like back and forth teetering of like not even giving yourself an opportunity to win 2 times in a row is tough, which is why I think you should trade for also future firsts if you can afford it. Which why you should try to accumulate as many young players as possible and complement that with perhaps other older players to kind of make pushes for wins every now and then in your league. Uh, it's a bit of a strategy game, and every single year it's gonna change dramatically based on retiring, injuries, when teams trade players, free agencies, and it's always good to keep in mind that when you're making your picks, you have to keep in mind who might be retiring, who's on a contract here, who do you know is just kind of on their way out in the league, and how can you position yourself, based on picks you have in the following year and the year after that.
Yeah, and also some other dynasty managers in your league are going to get better as time goes on.
That's
So you have to
true.
pay attention to that too. And some will have bad years again and regress. So that's a good point. Moving on here to my number 3 tip here. Don't go into your draft with a set strategy. And this goes for redraft as well. Let the draft happen, or you're not going to have a fun time. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to go on tilt. You're going to make really dumb picks, and you're not going to be thinking clearly because I've been there. You're looking like, I want this one player. I mocked, get him here every time. So it's a shoe in. I don't have to worry about it. Goes to pick right in front of you. And now you're like, whoops, okay, I don't know what to do now. I got to pick this. I got to look at that. Okay, I should probably look at trades. I should see, okay, what are you going to like? What are you going to pick next? Like, what do I need to do? Don't do that. Look at all the options. Look at all the potential outcomes. No one has a crystal ball. If we did, I never would have lost a fantasy football league ever because I'd be using that thing nonstop. And I'd be probably owning my own island somewhere in the Bahamas. Well, clearly, I'm not. So it's one of those things where you just got to plan ahead. And if you have a set strategy of I'm getting a running back, I'm getting a wide receiver, I'm doing this, and then that doesn't happen, it doesn't take place, it doesn't occur how you expect it to, it's not going to work out for you. And that's how you get set back in your dynasty league, and you go from a potential contender to stuck in the middle. There's nothing worse than being stuck in the middle of a dynasty league. I'd rather suck and lose every game than be sitting there just on the edge of playoffs and not get it. Because you get, okay, the 104, 105, 106 maybe. Doesn't mean anything. Because chances are you're not going to get a good pick anyway. You're not going to get a player. You're not going to get the cream of the crop in this upcoming draft. You're going to get whatever's left over. Don't go in with a strategy. Just don't do it. Your mind will thank you if you think of other options and take my number 1 tip, draft for talent, and trade for need. See, full circle. We're going full circle here on the Heroes of Fantasy Football podcast. All right. What is your next one, sir?
Landing spots matter. If you're looking to compete, perhaps even after the draft, I'd avoid players whose path to a starting or prominent role in that offense are out of arm's reach for a while. Take AD Mitchell, for example. I think all of us can agree that his talent is there, but there's currently a Michael Pittman Jr. and a Josh Downs in front of him, and both of them look just fine. At the
Let's not
moment.
forget about my boy Anthony Richardson. He's doing his part.
He's
Doing his part.
true. He is doing his part.
Or not, depending on which way you're looking at it.
So landing spots do matter, unfortunately. Like for instance, JSN. We can all agree that now JSN is balling out. But we can also agree that his freshman year in the league was not balling out because not his fault. Utilization. He had two guys in front of him, old Lockett and DK Metcalf. There's not much you can do in regards to that. You know, and if you're looking to compete now, it might be better to trade that pick. Get some pieces for your eventual playoff run that will hopefully work out for you, but probably won't because someone's going to get hurt. That's how life works. I'm sorry to tell you, but yeah, that I avoid stuff like that. Now, if you're looking, you have a long rebuild ahead of you, or maybe you're kind of fine on your roster and you just kind of want the insurance because maybe in a year or two this player might be retiring. Yeah, go for it. Sure. Because eventually some of those players are going to rise to at least a certain point where they will be maybe the wide receiver 2, maybe the wide receiver 1 on a team. Who knows? But definitely, if you're looking to compete at the this moment after the draft, I just avoid those players. Trade out of it, pick someone else who has an easier path, even if they might be a less of a talent. You'll be thinking yourself, I think, in my opinion, in the long run, because you'll have a better chance of winning. That might sound like counterproductive because you're taking the lesser talent, but I think in this scenario, like if you're looking to win, it might work out for you.
Opportunity is everything in fantasy football, as well as the NFL. I mean, if you don't get the opportunity, guess what? You can't show off any talent that you have. So I like that one. Landing spots are very, very important, and we're going to kind of drive that home when we're talking about the rookies, because some of them we like their talent, some of them are maybe not so much, but if they go in the right situation, that's going to be the tiebreaker of how you're going to select them in your draft. So I really like that tip. This tip I have here is just the way I do it, because what's the point of a dynasty league? To win, right? You want to build that winning team. I know you want it to build a winning team for a while, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. Things happen every year. Injuries, crazy holdouts, or things go weird. Offensive coordinators decide not to use the player on your team, and you suffer for it. With that being said, with the hit rates of rookies, I would rather take the proven player versus the unknown in a rookie. This is something we've been saying for a long time on this podcast. Chances are that pick probably isn't going to work out. It's just cold hard facts. It's how the rookie picks work. There are success stories, but there are also nightmares. N'Keal Harry is one of those. Najee Harris, you could say, is one of those. And then the opposite is Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, T. Higgins. There are a lot of players in the draft that go to situations, are unclear. Their landing spots weren't the best. They had trouble basically separating themselves, and you took a first round pick and basically just set it on fire as soon as you drafted them. Where you can find value in a veteran like a T. Higgins, like a DK Metcalf now, where you can take one of these, first round picks this year. I know this year's a really good draft class, and we'll get into it. But a couple years ago, when the draft class wasn't as spectacular and as proven, that would have been a good time to get some of these guys on your team because they're already established. You know they're good. You know they work in the NFL. You don't know what these rookies are going to do. Javonte Williams. He came out. We thought good things. Goes in a good situation. Well, now he's on the Cowboys for a $3 million deal. Doesn't really help you out, does it? Zeke Elliott. Great. Till he's not. You have all these guys where it's really fun to say, oh, I got 4 fourth round picks and I got this, I got that. I could get all these rookies and revamp my entire team. Figure maybe 50% of those might work out. If you're
Maybe.
good, maybe.
You'll get lucky if 50%
Yeah.
work out.
There are success stories, and I know you have. I'm not going to spoil this. You have another pick. We'll go over that. But there is value later in drafts that you can get every single year. Every year, there's somebody, one or two players, who are complete unknowns in the draft process that just ball out. So find the value in your drafts. Find the value with veterans that are proven commodities in fantasy football. What's next, sir?
My final tip, which you've alluded to, is every pick matters, even those pesky 5th-round picks. Everyone, I mean, the obvious success story here. Everyone knows pick 507 of the first year that I was in the league, Puka Nacua. My thought process going into it, and I say this every time I tell this story, I'm like, oh well, I mean Cooper Cup's on the team, and if he gets hurt, and I think at the time it was Van Jefferson was the second guy there. If he also gets hurt, maybe this guy will come out of nowhere for me and do stuff. Okay, and it turns out that from week 1 he was, because Cooper Cup did in fact get hurt. I didn't plan for that. To be quite honest, it was mostly just a shot in the dark, but it worked out. But a even funnier, lesser known from that same draft, pick 503, Tucker Kraft. I have him, my tight end for hopefully the foreseeable future. I only picked him because I had Travis Kelce as and Pat Frymuth, and I was convinced that Travis Kelce would have been retired by now. So I wanted a replacement.
It pretty
And
much is, but
pretty
that's
much.
just speaking from a manager who has him.
And I figured, oh, you know what? Why not? Let me go grab this random 5th-round player who's a tight end, and maybe it'll work out, right? Maybe was definitely not the thought of my mind. I just went, whatever. And the off chance it works out, it does, which it did. My point I'm trying to make here is whether you are trading this pick, whether you are picking a random player, put thought into it, right? If you're picking fourth and 5th-round players, think of a decent logical reason for it. He's a backup for one of your guys. Maybe there's perhaps he was this player was drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round or late in the 2nd round and has kind of slipped down because of perhaps some like issues with meshing with the team or whatever. Whatever the case may be, right? And you kind of see an opportunity there and you want to take that risk. You're already taking a risk picking a 4th round or 5th round player. Who cares? That variance is not going to be that much different. It's not like, oh man, you go from like a 5% risk to a 50. No, you go from like a 50% risk to like a 55% risk. It's not that big of a jump, in terms of taking a player like that. You're already taking enough risk taking him in the first place. So every pick matters. Put a thought into whatever it might be, because I promise you, it's going back from the beginning, full circle down to here. It is the only reason why I won. Puka Nacua is 100% the reason why I was able to kind of stay afloat. I made some good trades, but if it wasn't for Puka Nacua kind of pushing me over the hump, I probably would not have won that year that I did. So definitely just put the thought into your picks. It'll pay dividends in the long run. You are statistically likely to eventually hit one of those picks at some point. One of those like later, like 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds. Okay. Eventually, as you play, you will hit 1 or 2 of them.
Yes, you will. Yeah, I mean, I got Darnell Mooney. It's my last pick, a 5th-round pick. I know he hasn't been great, but this past season you could use
Was
him.
this
He was
year?
a flex. Yeah, it was pretty good. T. Higgins, I got at the 209. Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I got the 301 one year. There's value everywhere. And these are guys that we will... Exactly. These are guys that we will try to bring up on the next episode. There's always guys that you're going to want to try to, not leave the draft without, because you like their talent, you like their situation, you see something, and there's something that draws you to them. So we'll get into that. My final tip here.
Before you say this final tip, can you just tell me your first tip was the most important, right?
Yes.
Interesting.
This
So
this
can
is
you say
a
the
1A,
first tip?
1B. This is 1A, 1B
Oh,
situation.
1A,
Okay?
1B, hypocrite. No, kidding. Go for it.
Fantasy football is supposed to be what? It's supposed to be fun. Draft players you like. Okay? You don't want to draft a player you don't like. Don't do that, because then you have to root for him. Fantasy is so much fun when you have something invested into it. Okay? When things start sucking in your team or your NFL team, whatever fan you are, you have fantasy to turn to. And it's more fun when you're rooting for a player that you like, whether you've watched them in college or they're on your favorite team in college, or it's just something they said during a rookie interview or something. Draft guys that you like, please. There's nothing worse than having a player on your team that you're like, I'm not gonna play. I don't know why did I draft you? Like you're not on a team I like. I don't get to watch you. You don't get the opportunity. So like you're just there. It's a roster cloud. Look at players that you like. Okay? Have fun with it. Dynasty football is so much fun if you do it that way. We all enjoy it. That's why we started a podcast to bring up all these tips and tricks and just enjoy the fun you could have with fantasy football. So that's it. Those are our top 10 tips and tricks to help you win your Dynasty rookie drafts. Now, as I said, we are going to get into the rookie breakdowns this week. So stay tuned for those. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Really appreciate your help. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people like you listening and watching the videos. This is what we like to do. Okay? We want to bring as much knowledge and advice. We've seen a lot. In our league especially, we have some really crazy managers, but we are all in a bunch of leagues. Everyone comes at it a different way. It's a different perspective for everything. And what does that do? It makes everyone better because you look at how the ranges of outcomes for players, for teams, for thoughts really helps you out and makes you a better fantasy football manager. So that's what the goal of this podcast is. Bring that knowledge to you so you can maybe hear a different perspective on something that you've been thinking about. So, anything else to add, Chris, before we jet out of here?
No, I think I'm all good.
All right. Well, we'll stay tuned. We'll see you guys on the next show when we break down the rookies. All right, everyone.